He lived alone for years, speaking to no one until a terrified girl arrived at his ranch begging for shelter. That one knock brought danger, redemption, and a fight he thought he'd buried forever. Like, subscribe and tell me in the comments watching from. Let's get started. For years, the ranch felt more like a graveyard of memories than a place to live. The fences creaked in the wind. The cattle wandered without sound, and the cabin walls held every echo of the man I used to be before the war hollowed me out. I'd grown used to the quiet, even depended on it. Silence was easier than people. Silence didn't ask questions. Silence didn't remember the things I was trying to forget. The Wyoming plains were wide enough to hold my loneliness, and for a long time no one crossed the borders of my land. That evening, the sky looked bruised, streaked with long shadows as the sun dipped behind the distant hills. I was fixing a loose board on the porch when it happened, a soft, hesitant knock on the gate. It startled me so bad I nearly dropped the hammer. No one came here, not by accident. Not by design. For a moment I thought I imagined it, some leftover ghost of sound drifting through memory, but when I looked up, there she was, a slim shape against the dying light, breathing hard as though she'd run miles. She couldn't have been more than 20, maybe younger. Dust clung to her hair, dried mud streaked her clothes, and her boots looked worn to the bone. Fear lived in her eyes, raw, bright, and shaking. The kind of fear a person doesn't just wake up with. It's the kind carved by danger. When she spoke, her voice nearly cracked. "Please, I need shelter." I opened the gate slowly, wary but unable to ignore the desperation on her face. Her body trembled like she'd been in the grip of cold or terror, maybe both. As she stepped closer, I saw fresh cuts on her arms, the kind left by branches or a rushed escape through rough country. She kept glancing over her shoulder, like she expected someone to rise from the shadows behind her. I hadn't spoken to anyone in years, not more than a word here or there to a trader passing through town. My voice felt rusty, unused. "Who's after you?" I finally asked. She swallowed hard, eyes darting toward the horizon again. I can explain once I'm safe inside, please." Fear tightened her features like a rope pulled too fast. I hesitated. Letting a stranger inside could mean trouble, and trouble was the last thing I wanted. But something in her expression, maybe the trembling, maybe the exhaustion, maybe the honesty in her unguarded eyes, pushed through the cold wall I'd built around myself. The war had turned me into a man who avoided helping because helping meant losing. Yet here she was, breaking through that hardened shell with a single plea. I finally stepped aside and motioned her in. She whispered, "Thank you," so softly it barely reached my ears, but it carried more weight than a shout. Inside the cabin, the fire was low but warm. She sank near it, stretching her hands toward the flames as though the heat might stitch her back together. I handed her a tin cup of water. She drank like she hadn't tasted anything clean in days. Her eyes swept across the room, scanning walls, shelves, windows the way someone does when they're afraid danger might slip through a crack. That alertness made me uneasy. She wasn't just scared, she was hunted. And whoever hunted her wasn't far behind. Her breathing slowed only slightly, but her shoulders remained tense. The shadows inside the cabin seemed to thicken as evening turned into night. I sat a few feet away, unsure what to say. My voice hadn't been used for comfort in years. She kept glancing at me, uncertain whether she could trust me fully. Finally, I cleared my throat. "You're safe here for now." The way her face softened at those words, it struck something inside me, something I thought the war had killed. She nodded, but her eyes remained cloudy with secrets she wasn't ready to share. Outside, the wind howled like a warning through the empty plains. Minutes stretched into nearly an hour. I could see exhaustion pulling her eyelids down, but she fought sleep as though sleep might invite danger. I placed a blanket near her, not too close, giving her space. "You can rest," I said quietly. She touched the blanket hesitantly, almost like she hadn't felt something soft in a long time. When she finally wrapped it around herself, a faint shiver passed through her, part cold, part relief. She looked younger in the firelight, almost fragile. I wondered what kind of life had pushed her to a stranger's doorstep in this state. Eventually she drew a shaky breath. "Someone's after me," she whispered again. But this time the words carried more weight, more fear, more truth. My jaw tightened, old instincts waking up, the instincts I'd tried to bury when I walked away from the world. She didn't say more, but she didn't need to. Her trembling voice told me enough. Whoever chased her wasn't just cruel, they were close. As she stared into the fire, small sparks reflected in her eyes, mixing with fear and determination. She wasn't weak, just worn down, and that stirred something protective in me I hadn't felt in years. I leaned back in my chair, staring at her through the flickering firelight. Every part of me wanted to stay silent, keep to myself, pretend she was just passing through, but I couldn't. Not anymore. This ranch had been quiet for so long, too long. And now, with a single frightened knock, everything had changed. I didn't know her name. I didn't know her story. But I knew one thing: she came here for a reason, and whether I liked it or not, that reason had now become part of my life. The fire crackled softly, but the girl didn't lift her eyes from the dark windows. Every flicker of light made her flinch. Every howl of wind made her breathe faster. She held the blanket tight, shivering not from cold, but from a fear that had sunk deep into her bones. I watched her for a long moment, wondering how someone so young had already learned to expect danger hiding in every shadow. When I finally asked who hunted her, her fingers trembled around the cup I'd given her. "My uncle's men," she whispered. "They want the land my father left me." Her voice sounded brittle, like it might crack apart at any second. She stared into the flames, their glow reflecting in her eyes. "My father died last winter," she continued quietly. "He left the ranch to me. My uncle said a girl couldn't run land. He wanted it for himself. When I refused to sign it over, he sent men." She swallowed hard, her throat tightening. I felt something old and heavy stir inside me. Memories of another time when men took what didn't belong to them. I'd seen bullies like that during the war, and I'd seen worse. Before I could offer a single word, the ground trembled, faint at first, then stronger hooves, many of them. A cold wave rolled through my chest. She wasn't imagining the danger. It had followed her to my door. I rose slowly, my chair scraping across the wooden floor. Her eyes widened with panic. "They found me," she whispered. I walked to the corner and lifted the rifle I hadn't touched in years. Dust clung to the barrel, but the metal still felt familiar in my hands, like a memory I couldn't forget. Silence had kept me company, but tonight it wasn't enough. I stepped toward the door, each footstep echoing the heartbeat pounding in my ears. For years, I'd tried to bury the soldier inside me, the part of me trained to stand, fight, survive. But the moment I heard those horses, that part rose back up like it had never left. Behind me, the girl stood shakily. "Don't go out there," she pleaded. I looked back at her, seeing the fear in her face. "I'm not going out to fight," I said quietly. "I'm going out to end something that should have ended a long time ago." She swallowed, hugging the blanket tighter. The night air hit like ice as I opened the door. The moon hung low above the plains, casting a pale glow over the landscape. Shapes moved on the ridge, men on horseback, dark silhouettes against the silver sky. They rode down slowly, confident, as if they already believed the land belonged to them. I stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand but lowered. I wasn't about to start a war, but I wouldn't let one roll over me either. When the riders reached the gate, their leader, a broad man with a scar across his cheek, smirked down at me. "Evening," he said. His voice dripped with arrogance. "We're looking for a girl," he continued. "She's run off with something that don't belong to her." I stared back without blinking. "She's under my roof," I said, "and nothing under my roof is yours." The men exchanged glances, amusement flickering in their eyes. They weren't used to hearing no, especially not from someone standing alone on a porch with dust on his boots. The leader leaned forward in his saddle. "This ain't your fight, old-timer. Step aside. We'll take the girl and be gone before dawn." I raised the rifle just enough for him to notice. "She stays," I said, voice steady. The men stiffened. The leader narrowed his eyes. "You got no idea who we are." A long silence settled between us. I held his gaze. "Maybe not," I answered. "But I know men like you." His jaw tightened. The horses shifted uneasily. Then his expression twisted into something colder. "Have it your way." With a swift motion, he raised his hand. But before he could drop it to signal the attack, a gunshot cracked through the night. A bullet struck the dirt inches from the leader's horse, sending the animal rearing. The men looked around in confusion. Then I saw her, the girl, standing in the doorway with her father's old revolver gripped tight in her shaking hands. Her breath trembled, but her eyes blazed with something fierce. "You're not taking anything," she said. "Not anymore." The leader snarled. "You think you can stop us?" She took a step forward. I'm done running." The men shifted, uncertain now that she'd found her voice. I moved beside her, rifle raised not as a soldier, not as a savior, but as someone who finally understood what silence had cost me. The standoff stretched like a taut rope in the dark. The wind whistled across the plains. A hawk screeched somewhere in the distance. The leader's men weren't soldiers, they were bullies. Bullies relied on fear, but fear wasn't working anymore. Not tonight. When I stepped off the porch, leveling the rifle at the leader's chest, something in his eyes changed. Maybe he realized we weren't backing down. Maybe he saw that this land wasn't his, no matter how many riders he brought. Or maybe he saw something else, something he didn't expect from a quiet rancher and a frightened girl. Whatever he saw, it made him hesitate. And that hesitation cracked the false courage that held his men together. One by one, they lowered their guns. The leader looked at them in disbelief, then glared back at me. "This ain't over," he spat. I stepped closer, feeling the old battlefield steel rise in my spine. "It is," I said. "And if you come back, you won't ride home." The message settled deep. The leader's jaw worked in anger, but he knew better than to die for pride. With a sharp tug on the reins, he turned his horse around. The men followed, riding back into the darkness until their silhouettes vanished completely over the ridge. I exhaled slowly, lowering my rifle. The girl watched them disappear, her entire body shaking now that the danger had passed. When I turned to her, tears filled her eyes, not of fear but relief. She stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. "You didn't have to help me." I shook my head. "Maybe not," I said quietly. "But some battles don't leave you alone. Sometimes you have to finish them." She nodded, wiping her eyes. A soft breeze passed between us, carrying the night's tension away. We walked back into the cabin together. The fire still glowed, soft and warm. For the first time in years, the silence inside didn't feel empty. It felt shared. She sat by the fire, the blanket sliding around her shoulders. I set the rifle aside and took the chair across from her. "You can stay," I said, "as long as you need." Her eyes lifted, soft and grateful. "Thank you," she whispered. I nodded, feeling something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Hope, maybe. Or the quiet understanding that life had finally found its way back into my lonely ranch.